6:10 a.m. on August 29th, Katrina made landfall in Louisiana. Waves of water surged into low-lying areas.
Operator 16.
Yes, 911, I need help.
Where are you, ma'am?
I'm in the ninth floor. I'm stuck in an egg to me and my little sister and my mom, and they got water in the whole house.
So I'm gonna die. The water is steady rising in the attic, ma'am. And I'm gonna drown in the attic.
Hello?
2 hours after landfall, levees in the lower 9th Ward gave way.
Think you can swim over here?
Floodwaters killed 100 people and forced survivors to clamber to safety.
Hold the rope. Let him pull to the boat.
Later that day, crucial levees protecting the city center in New Orleans began to crumble and collapse. Parts of the city soon lay under 15 feet of water.
80% of New Orleans flooded. The levees are broken, and they're having a difficult time trying to fix the situation. The damage is staggering.
The real concern is anybody who decided to ride the storm out inside their house, they may have actually drowned.
New Orleans was now a major disaster zone, with over 50,000 people still stranded in emergency shelters. 5 days after Katrina hit, much-needed federal assistance had yet to reach New Orleans.
This morning I found one lady in a wheelchair dead, in the ladies' bathroom, and another lady laying on the floor by the ladies' bathroom dead. And then there's this guy right here that's dead that's been sitting out here for a while.
Now, we turn to the recent anniversary of one of the great crimes of America. August 29th, 2005, 17 years ago, Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. You might ask, isn't a hurricane just a natural disaster? Are we really going to blame the system for a hurricane? The story of Hurricane Katrina only starts with a natural disaster. The bigger disaster was the murderous neglect and violent repression that this system brought down in the hurricane's aftermath on the 100,000 especially black people and poor people who weren't evacuated. As a teenager, I remember waking up at 6 a.m. every day to watch as this unfolded. People braving the waters and devastation to save each other and to secure supplies for groups of survivors. Being ridiculed and slandered as animals, looters, and thugs. Bodies floating through the city and people climbing to the tops of buildings to escape the floods. Desperately chalking rooftops and making signs in hopes that someone would see their calls for help. I watched as the official response to this was the governor deploying National Guards and police who say they were given orders to kill and shoot and kill looters.
New Orleans police captain is breaking his silence tonight about what he says really happened in the chaotic days following Hurricane Katrina.
It was clear, he specifically said for us to shoot looters, and to start shooting looters that day.
Caravans of aid were rejected at gunpoint by the authorities. And a Louisiana congressman's sick praise to God for sending the hurricane to clean up New Orleans public housing. And in the years since, the rebuilding efforts were sabotaged and people were scattered across the country, families separated, in what amounts to an ethnic cleansing of the city's black population. Throughout all this, many people were forced to confront big questions about this society. For me, at that time, that was it. I had already been thinking about revolution and begun to learn about Bob Avakian. But watching this go down in New Orleans, that was it. That was it for this country. That was it for this system. And that was it for me living for anything less than revolution. So, I'm going to be talking today with Joe Veale to look back at this history and key lessons to learn from that. This would be an important conversation at any time, but I want you to think about and take to heart that now we live in a time that Bob Avakian has analyzed is a rare time, when revolution becomes even more possible. And as we look back at a moment when society was jolted, and the ugly reality of America was laid bare for millions, think about the even more profound crisis of today. As we look at the lessons of what were the responsibilities of revolutionaries then, think about what we can and must rise to today. So, I want to welcome Joe Veale, veteran revolutionary, who as a young man was a member of the Black Panther Party, and after encountering the work of Bob Avakian while he was in prison, became a revolutionary communist and follower of BA, and has dedicated himself to making revolution. Joe Veale also went down to Louisiana in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. So Joe, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So Joe, we've been talking about, this anniversary, and you were telling me about the experience of going down to Louisiana in the aftermath. Why don't you share with the audience some of, what the thinking was and what some of the key lessons are that you'd like to share with people about that?
Yeah, well, a crew of us, went down, myself and other like Rev Comms. Some of us flew down, some of us drove down. People needed revolution in this situation. They needed revolutionary leadership. We like everybody else, we saw, what was like happening, with some of what you like mentioned, people were, unnecessarily, being left to die. People were on rooftops for like days. People walking through like flooded waters. The place, the levees had broke and it was flood 20 feet high. And a lot of people died, close to 2,000 people, 1,500 of them in New Orleans and stuff. And you saw the bodies floating in the water, bloated bodies, decomposing bodies. And the government did nothing. The government did absolutely nothing to, prevent that from like happening, or to, to save people or to rescue them out of that situation and stuff. And here you had, most of the people who were, affected in this way. There was poor people, overwhelmingly Black, disabled. Some people disabled, mentally disabled, and people were shot for trying to get out. People were trying to get to another parish outside of New Orleans. Guns put on them by the police, by the sheriffs, by the cops. People crossing a bridge to get out of New Orleans, to get out of the flood. They were shot, killed on the bridge by the police. There was 30,000 National Guards that they deployed there to bring about law and order, not to, to aid the people or to meet the people's like needs, desperate needs in that situation, but to bring about law and order and stuff. And they, like I said, they shot people they killed 11 people. They shot people on Danziger Bridge. It blew holes in blew their whole chest out, then kicked their bodies, having contempt like for them as kicking their body all across the bridge.
Ronald Madison, a 40-year-old mentally disabled man, was shot in the back and then repeatedly kicked as he was dying.
They left, people were in jail, in prison, 7,000 people in jail and prison. The water is coming in, flooding, contaminated, with all the, poison that, from the bodies, from the feces, from the bodies of dead animals or whatever like this here. And the prisoners was just left there with nothing, left on their own. And then if they tried to like get out, and the guards would shoot into the prison to force them back in. And then when the guards did return to the prison, did they bring first aid? Did they bring food and water to these prisoners? The prisoners were forced to drink contaminated water. They was left in there for days, drinking this contaminated water just to try to survive. Did they bring aid for any kind of first when they came? No, they brought batons, tasers, they brought guns, and they brought brutality.
The water started getting high, so after the water got to our waist level, the deputies came. They did have deputies come at that point. You know what they told us? Getting in your cells, and they was locking the doors.
And they, herded people like cattle into the Superdome, where they put, like I said, like cattle, 25,000 like people, and and all the shit that they like ran. It was running all kinds of people were, demonized. These are animals. That's what they ran about, like the mouthpieces of those who run this system as well, and they had their enforcers back that up. These are animals that need to be violently repressed, controlled and violently repressed in this situation. That's what they did. Here you had the rulers of this system who had deployed, because this was going on, they had deployed thousands of their troops in Iraq during this time, the illegal invasion of Iraq. And they put up housing and food and shelter in a matter of days. But here you had like this situation that I'm describing here in New Orleans. And what did they do? That was just like a glaring, illustration of what this system is about, what it cares about and what it does not care about, who it cares about and who it does not give a damn about. And that's, all the more reason why that this system needs to be swept away and overthrown as soon as possible. And so we went there, and we went there and we had, with that, understanding some of that, and bringing and trying to deepen some of that understanding, bring some of that understanding like to the masses and stuff. And we had like even before that, we had demands of what needed to like happen to prevent this catastrophe that was shaping up from like happening and stuff. That's what was happening. And I would just say, people can get, some of what I'm like was just like saying, if you watch this, this on Apple TV right now, it's about Memorial Hospital when the floods and the waters like came there to New Orleans and people were like left there in the hospital, the doctors, nurses, and the patients, just left to die. And it's, people, I would encourage everybody to watch that, and they're streaming like right now.
So I think, what you were just saying covers a lot of like what the response was from this system in the face of this natural disaster and what people had to watch on as it was, unfolding. One of the things you were mentioning when we were talking, earlier is, people were also being lied on, and all kinds of stories were being told about what people were doing, looting and fighting, and, the city was out of control. Why don't you share with people what you were, talking about in terms of what were people actually doing in the face of all this while the authorities were doing what they were doing?
Yeah, well, people were, acting, very heroically, we thought, and I think, in reality, people were acting very heroically because people were, helping one another in that situation. People were, where people needed food, people needed water. Some people were able to find the ways to get that. They found the ways to get that and to distribute that amongst the masses who were in desperate need of that. And when the shit like broke down the way that it did, this is just one story, that you can see in the on Prime Video, Trouble in the Water, to do Larry and Scott, who were like, before this like happened, they were like at each other, on the same block, but they was, who's regulated, and they were ready, to kill one another and stuff if it, came to that in that situation. But during the course of this here, they worked together to rescue lots and lots of people. They made out of a punching bag, they made a floating raft to get people out of the flooded homes that they were in, to take them to safety and stuff. And it was really inspiring, like to see them, how that they had like changed and transformed in that situation, to start like working like together instead of like working against like one another and treating each other like as enemies. So what people have in common and what's in their fundamental like interests and the unity of that, some of that began to be expressed in beginning like ways, and people were able like to act like on that. Now, not in the full development, the full like blown like way. There was limitations, of course, like to that, how far that could like go. But that was something that, that we when we went to, to unite with and to give, further like leadership. But when people was doing that, like what they were like doing, what I was just like describing, they ran up against the violent repression. They ran up against those 30,000 armed National Guards. They ran up against these, police and sheriff's forces who were forcing you back into the situations and forcing you back into relations where you are, more pitted against like each other instead of like working together and to aid people during like that time. It just showed for us, it just showed a lot of like potential of like the masses, of these masses who are demonized in this way to be, potential leaders of a whole, like the leaders of a revolution and being able to be leaders of a whole new like society and stuff where people are like working in the common interest for the common good. If they have that leadership and the leadership understands, how to bring that out in situations where on the surface it may seem really like difficult. It may seem extremely difficult to do, but if you really like understand and you really like scientific, you could see what I'm describing like here and how to, not only tap into that, but to lead that and to spread that and to bring others into that and to going up against what is preventing you from being able to do that and preventing you to suffer needlessly and unnecessarily and die unnecessarily in the way that people were and did in that situation.
Okay, so Joe, you've taken us through a lot. You've taken us through the ugly viciousness of this system's response and what got revealed about this country. You've taken us through some of the beauty of the heroism and bravery displayed by people in response to this, despite this system's efforts, such as Scott and Larry and what they were doing. But this was also throughout society. The doctors and nurses depicted in 5 Nights at Memorial Hospital that you mentioned were heroically trying to save patients, taking people upstairs to be rescued from the rooftop. And you talked about what this showed about the potential of the masses of people to live a whole different way if we get rid of this system and had a different power backing people up to live a whole different way. Now, you and others, with the revolution at the time, were doing a lot in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina to mobilize people to go down there, to expose the crimes of this system. But you were sharing that, Bob Avakian had drawn some key lessons afterwards about what the responsibilities of revolutionaries were at that time and what needed to be learned about, what people were not able to see about what revolutionaries could be doing at the time. So why don't you share a little bit more about, what you've been thinking about that and what Bob Avakian what lesson he was trying to draw from it.
Yeah, I think it's important because this has been a hallmark of Bob Avakian's leadership, to learn from experience, negative as well as positive. He's insisted that we revolutionaries subject this experience to deep study and reflection. And 2 years, after that, after Katrina, he made this point in the works that you can find in Making Revolution and Emancipating Humanity, available at revcom.us. And it's well worth constantly returning to the points. He points out in instances in which people bow to difficulties of the situation, including the repressive force of the state. And he goes on to say this: what could have been done by an organized communist vanguard in that situation was way more than what was done. Now, the effect of the vanguard acting fully in accordance with its responsibility as a vanguard and everything that might have come about as a result of that, what we sometimes refer to as the revolution, counter-revolution, more revolution dynamic, would have been tremendous in the sense of being very intense. But if we think we're going to get from here to there from the present circumstances to one where the whole direction of society is coming up for grabs. Without that kind of dynamic repeatedly along the way, and then in a greatly magnified way, when finally a revolutionary situation and a revolutionary people in the millions does emerge, then we are deluding ourselves, and we should just forget about the whole thing, which of course we are not going to do. And thinking about this, and thinking about this and reflecting upon it, this is a very important question, and thinking about that situation, but also for today, for the future, and for the immediate future, like right now, the lessons that are being like drawn here by BA and stuff. Because one of the things would have like taken like for us, for the vanguard, is for ourselves, is to recognize how vulnerable and unrighteous and illegitimate the violence that the authorities, that the rulers of this system was using against the masses of people, how unrighteous and illegitimate that is and was in the eyes of millions and millions of people in this country and even more around the world. That was a big vulnerability. And we had to recognize that and take advantage, lead people to take advantage of that. By we're going to do what is necessary, lead people to do what is necessary to meet the needs, the urgent needs of that situation, of that immediate situation, as well as the need for people to begin to understand why this shit happened in the way that it did, why was the people who were victimized by it, mainly like poor people and black people, why that happened in the way that it did, and we weren't gonna not allow them to be able to get away with treating people as worse than wild animals and shit. So we had to lead people. We had to recognize that and lead people to do that. Then whatever they threw at to prevent that from happening, because that's what it when you do when you do stand up in that way, it's going to be this, as BA said, there's revolution, there's counter-revolution, and there's more revolution dynamic to work through that, to whatever they threw at us and threw at the masses to prevent that was from happening. We were prepared, and we were preparing the people to fight through that, to struggle through that, to bring more people into that dynamic, into that process, that who's righteous, who has right and righteousness on their side, and who has unrighteousness and illegitimacy on their side. All that would have changed things much more significantly and tremendously on the road towards getting to towards revolution, to get rid of this system once and for all.
Well, Joe, I've been really appreciative of this opportunity, and thank you for sharing all that. And it's given us a lot to think about. And just, before we end, I want to say just two things. First of all, go to revcom.us to read more about this history and the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in the American Crime series, and read the Check It Out on 5 Days at Memorial, a docudrama of life and death at a hospital during Hurricane Katrina. And lastly, to you watching, think again about the insights and lessons that Joe Veale just shared. Think what they mean in a rare time when the possibility of making an actual revolution is even greater, but the forces for revolution need to come from behind and bring forward a revolutionary people. There isn't someone else who is going to seize this chance to make this emancipating revolution. You need to become part of this revolutionary force. You need to get with the RevComs. You need to be part of taking up the leadership of Bob Avakian.
We really want to appreciate how Noche and Joe vividly brought us back to the horrors of what this system, its rulers, and its enforcers did to the masses of people who suffered terribly during and after Hurricane Katrina. As they emphasized, hearing and seeing this matters, especially for those of you who didn't live through Katrina, but even for those of you who did, as the scale and the scope of what this system did might have receded into distant memory. Joe and Noche did a first pass on situating the importance of drawing lessons from the experience of revolutionaries who went down to New Orleans for the rare time that we are now in, when eruptions, if not just like Katrina, but of the same magnitude and complexity, will erupt. What Joe gets into at the end of their conversation relates to one important element of the roadmap laid out by Bob Avakian in Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating. The roadmap for organizing now for revolution involves a lot of important ideological struggle with the masses of people over what is the problem we face and what is the solution. And Joe points to an important point of orientation, what it means to not bow down to necessity in tumultuous events in which suddenly millions are aroused to political life. Instead, he discusses that revolutionaries need to apply an all-around materialist method, that is, scientific method that sees beneath the surface to the hidden weaknesses of the enemy and to the latent strengths of the masses of people when they have revolutionary leadership. Andy and I both felt, as they did, that it's important for people to watch 5 Days at Memorial Hospital. As Noche said, we should recognize the tremendous heroism of many of the doctors and nurses. Yet also, we should think about how the choices they made were constrained within the terms as they were presented to them by the storm and by the authorities. And we should consider the difference that vanguard leadership to break out of those confines could have made, which is what Joe is exploring.